Hello and welcome to this video. Let's begin by talking about additional guideposts, including the inspired messages that are sometimes placed in certain movies. There are numerous additional sources of information that are here to help us by acting as guideposts along life's way. Some are so subtle that you might never be aware that they're providing important information to give greater understanding and spiritual growth to those who have eyes to see, ears to hear, and a heart that is receptive to the information that's being given. Others are not quite so subtle, yet it is nevertheless not particularly well known that they are such sources of this kind of knowledge. For a great many years, however, it has been well known to some that the arts are often favored by higher positive forces as a means of delivering important, inspired messages to the people of our planet. This has been especially true in the case of a number of movies that has been made since the 1970s, and we will discuss some of them here. It would not be wise, nor is it intended for me to put words into the mouths of the talented writers, directors, producers, and actors involved, for many of them have no idea that the stories they're telling have been inspired for the purpose of bringing important messages to the worldwide audiences that they have reached, and that they will continue to reach over the years. In the opinion of some, the first Star Wars trilogy of films that was released constitutes one of the most significant instances of such inspiration in the last 30 years or more. It should be restated, however, that there is no intention by this author to put words into the mouths of the people who create such beautiful stories, because they often have no idea that they're being inspired as instruments through which powerful, higher positive spiritual forces deliver important messages that register on the higher consciousness of a worldwide audience. It might interest you to know that within the story of that Star Wars trilogy is woven a thread that is common into the stories in a number of other films also. In order to provide a bit of background for some of the higher concepts that these stories are bringing forth, it should be explained that our planet is watched over by a spirit being known as the planetary Logos. One of the many blessings provided by this Logos is that of acting as a spiritual mentor, teacher, and guide to persons who have reached a certain level of spiritual development in their lives as they make their way on the path to higher spiritual attainment. The time period for this high office of Logos for our planet approximates the length of an age, which is about 2160 years. For most of the Piscean or Piscean age, our planetary Logos has been the beloved one, the ascended Master Jesus, the Christ. If you recall, he told us that he would be with us always, even to the end of the age. This role is quite well portrayed symbolically, albeit on a galactic scale rather than a planetary scale, in the first released Star Wars trilogy by the Jedi Master Yoda, who is a spiritual mentor, teacher, guide for those who have reached a certain level of readiness. Although his time of mentorship is near an end, Yoda takes on the training of aspirant Luke Skywalker, a young man who is strong with the Force, and who has the potential to bring about much needed change by precipitating the events and circumstances that will destroy the evil empire and restore harmony and order to the galaxy. Master Yoda begins this aspirant's formal training as it had been done for others many times before. During the teaching process, Master Yoda speaks many words of wisdom, planting in the mind and heart of his student the seeds of greater spiritual growth. Even before we see Yoda, however, we hear the words of the Jedi teachings as spoken by Obi-Wan Kenobi when he tells Luke, "Your eyes can deceive you. Reach out with your feelings. Trust your feelings." This is a somewhat veiled way of telling Luke to reach out to the higher self that lives within each of us and to trust the guidance of the higher self. The Master Yoda himself later tells Luke, "Luminous beings are we, not this crude matter," as he touches Luke's shoulder. Meaning, of course, we're not the material person, but the luminous beings of light. This, of course, means that our bodies are not the real us, but simply the vehicles that we, spirit beings of light, have chosen and fashioned according to our needs for a given incarnation, to allow us to live in and learn on this physical, material plane. Because this is a physical, material world, there are, of course, many aspects of life on this material plane that easily lend themselves to becoming obstacles in one's path and are not particularly helpful to those who seek a higher way of life. To quote Master Yoda once again, a Jedi craves not these things. In one manifestation of such an obstacle, there are from time to time those who become overly concerned about appearance. They're either speculating about how some great spiritual personality from the past may have looked, or even deciding how people today ought to have a certain appearance to be more acceptable in society. An example of this in the film series was Luke Skywalker's mistaken understanding that in seeking Yoda he was seeking a great warrior. Master Yoda very wisely addressed this false notion on one occasion when he reminded Luke that war does not make one great. Yoda addressed that idea a second time when he said to Luke, "Judge me by my size, do you? And well, you should not." Yoda could as easily have said, "Judge me by my color, or by my clothing, or by my education, or by my economic condition, do you? And well, you should not." Very probably you could add to these a number of additional instances in this trilogy where the Master Yoda passes along his knowledge to the serious young aspirant, Luke Skywalker. You may be assured that these pearls of wisdom did not occur in the dialogue by accident. They were inspired without question. When Master Yoda's work is completed and he passes over to the other higher plane of existence, he will go on to a yet higher work in the same way that the Master Jesus, who has been our planetary Logos, will soon replace Osiris, the existing solar Logos, and a new planetary Logos will come into being in the years ahead. The latter is due to the earlier coming together into oneness of the universal Christ Spirit and the quickly maturing, already present, planetary master of and God's messenger for the newly arriving Aquarian age. As an aside, I would like to say at this time that using the term the Aquarian age may cause many to misunderstand what has been said and the reason why this term was used. Some of those who read it will automatically want to classify me and the information here by applying some name or label to them. They seek to do this so that they can then attempt to associate me and this information with any and all beliefs and writings, no matter how outlandish, that they currently ascribe to that same classification, name, or label. These things are done with the hope of discrediting the information here and elsewhere which does not agree with their own beliefs. Let it be said here and now that the speaker, I, subscribe to my own words and writings, and I should not be associated with anything other than those. Let it be further stated that the facts, no matter how different from that with which we have become accustomed, need no label other than truth, and as we stated previously, it has been said that the only real truth is that all truth is relative. In the first released Star Wars trilogy, Darth Vader is symbolic of great numbers of people within collective humankind, and, like them, he's been seduced by the dark side of the Force. In the case of literal greater humankind today, far too many have been seduced by materialism, the worship of things, by greed for those things, and by greed for the money that is needed to purchase them, by lust for power, and for the wealth that is needed to attain and keep it, and by negative feelings of anger and hatred, jealousy, and so forth. On the other side of the coin, it's very well known that there are many decent, loving people in this world. There are also, however, many who feel and many who claim closeness to God through their religion, their faith, and so forth. Be assured, however, that there are exceedingly few who, like Luke Skywalker, have been willing to give up seeking anything for themselves, and who have instead truly dedicated themselves to a life of service. That is why the Judeo-Christian Bible, as an example, states that straight is the gate and narrow is the way, and few there be that find it. Luke Skywalker symbolizes the unselfish servant of higher positive forces. a man who's been willing to reincarnate in this physical world to help get humankind back on track, so to speak, to bring humankind out of the darkness and the shadows and lead the way back to the light. In other words, to point humankind to and to prepare them for the one who will follow, the one who is the master of the Aquarian age, God's messenger for the planet, the person whose spirit is one with and who is today the physical manifestation of the return of the universal Christ, just as was the beloved Master Jesus almost 2,000 years ago. This now maturing master of the Aquarian age will then help humankind take the next steps on their long journey back to God. Darth Vader, as Luke's father, again symbolizes the humankind that is, on a physical level, the father of us all, so to speak. Luke's mission is made plain when in the Return of the Jedi he tells the dying Darth Vader, who has just thrown off the chains that had bound him to the dark side of the Force, "I've got to save you." Vader's response tells us that Luke's mission to this point has been successful when he says, "You already have, Luke." He knows that with the help of his son, symbolizing one of the two literal sons to be discussed later, he, representing humankind, has been freed from the dark side and has returned to the light. Other significant roles are symbolically portrayed by the other characters in the trilogy. Obi-Wan symbolizes those personalities who have mastered life in the material world and return only to serve. This service includes acting as teacher guides for those who are so-called students on the path. And aren't we all, to one degree or another, students on the path? When these students reach a certain level of attainment, then Yoda, in this trilogy, may take over their training. The Emperor in the series is actually symbolic of the Antichrist, who, in the reality of today, is not far from coming onto the world stage. I think it's going to be very soon. The relatively recent approach of the planet Mars in 2003 to the closest point to Earth that has been in almost 60,000 years was not likely to have been an insignificant event in that regard, nor was it without significance in relation to the Afghan War, the invasion of Iraq by the United States, and even larger conflicts which are expected to follow in the years ahead. Excuse me. In the Star Wars story, those around Luke, his sister, his friend Han Solo, and others are symbolic of those who will be there to follow an aspiring Jedi in order to assist with such an important work as bringing humankind back to the light, that which is symbolically being carried out by Luke Skywalker. As you might imagine, such missions are not an everyday occurrence. The beginning of the Star Wars story, another trilogy of films, was actually the second of true trilogies that were released. The beginning film of that trilogy, Episode 1, as you may know, was the first film in what was to be a series of 3 trilogies originally envisioned by their creator. This series is being called a prequel to the first released original trilogy of Star Wars films. This prequel trilogy, like the original, has given us a great many worthwhile things to consider in our thoughts and our meditations. One of those would certainly be how well-intended persons, who are true seekers on the path, can be tempted and seduced by negative influences, which in these films are called the dark side of the Force. It has been extremely interesting to watch the beginnings of the story as it unfolds in this, the first of the 3, as originally planned, trilogies. Excuse me. There's no question about the fact that Episode 1, released in the spring of 1999, upheld the consistently high quality of the films previously released. It shows us Obi-Wan Kenobi as a young man, an apprentice to Jedi Master Qui-Gon Jinn. We also see the father of Luke Skywalker as a young child named Anakin, who is discovered to be very powerful in his potential as a Jedi. The viewer is also shown that the various planetary systems of the galaxy have generally been able to maintain order through a political body called their Senate. We're able to see the hints of future trouble as various individuals and groups are indicated to be those who are considering becoming involved in plans and activities which have in past times caused the downfall of many societies and caused great suffering for their people. The plans and activities that are hinted at as being considered are motivated by the desire for greater wealth, power, and control throughout the galaxy. This film lays the foundation for the entire Star Wars story as it begins to unfold. Likewise, the second film of the prequel trilogy, released in the spring of 2002, continued to provide a high level of quality entertainment to its worldwide audience. This film, known as Episode 2, allows us to see Anakin Skywalker as a young man, an apprentice to Obi-Wan Kenobi, now a Jedi Master. Anakin has been allowed to study the Jedi ways under the teachings of Obi-Wan. As Anakin's story unfolds, we begin to see some of the events in his life that have an influence on his seeming inability to make a complete commitment to the Jedi way of life. We can see as the story goes on the beginning of what can happen in the life of an aspiring Jedi when he begins to have too much of a tendency to think of self rather than a life of service. In fairness to any such aspirant, it is not easy to live a life over years of time which seeks less and less for self and more to serve. Such a life can be even more difficult for a young man Anakin's age as depicted in this film. Nevertheless, it is possible for this to be done, even though setbacks from time to time are inevitable. Episode 2 also provides us with additional information. It's done very subtly, but it's nevertheless being accomplished as a result of the fact that higher positive forces have inspired these films. The information that's being so subtly provided here is at the beginning stages of plans by those hinted at in Episode 1 to take over and eventually do away with the existing republic and its protections for the people are slowly and carefully being put into place and carried out. There is one who seems to show particular interest in the development and frustrations of young Anakin Skywalker. Excuse me. This film lays the groundwork for the final film in the prequel trilogy. The final film of this trilogy, Episode 3, The Revenge of the Sith, was released to theaters on May 19, 2005, with long lines of Star Wars fans waiting for many hours to be among the first to see the third and final film in this trilogy. Because of the popularity of the stories, the public attended in such great numbers that the film at that time set new box office records for the release of a motion picture. Many have acclaimed that this picture is as good as the original movie released in 1977. That is indeed a high compliment. Those who have attended expecting to see the same high level of entertainment that the Star Wars films have come to exemplify were not disappointed. We see the young man, Anakin Skywalker, as an extremely capable Jedi apprentice to Master Obi-Wan Kenobi. The members of the Jedi Council are wary of giving Anakin the title of Jedi Master despite his capabilities, because they appear to sense his seeming inability to let go of self completely and seek only to serve selflessly. Anakin finds this to be only one of a number of things that trouble him. A dream then further complicates Anakin's feelings when it seems to indicate unhappy future events concerning his secret wife. He whom the story shows as one who seeks power over the galaxy sees the concerns and frustrations that Anakin is experiencing and uses them to move Anakin in the wrong direction down a path that he knows will lead Anakin to the dark side. Anakin, in a moment of crisis in the story, has to make a decision that will direct him down one of two paths. And in that moment of crisis, unfortunately he makes the wrong decision and does so in a way that seems to commit him to the dark side of the Force for the rest of his life. In seeking for self, even indirectly, he inadvertently brings about that unhappy future event which he had tried to avoid by moving to the dark side of the Force. In addition, he helps to bring about the beginnings of a new empire and a resultant time when that which is good in the galaxy must retreat into a quiet time of exile until proper planning and preparation can be made for a rebellion against the empire and light can once more be restored to the galaxy. The film ends with the birth and naming of the twins, Luke and Leia, the children of Anakin, who are then placed in their respective foster homes to later become two of the main characters in the trilogy of episodes 4, 5, and 6, thus leading us directly into the storyline of episode 4, A New Hope, which was the first of the first release trilogy story. The final film and the second to be released, which is really the first part of the story trilogy, has much to teach us, and we will undoubtedly learn more as we review the film from time to time. Only a few important points will be mentioned here, but there are countless others of varying importance. One of the most, if not the most important lesson to be learned in the opinion of this speaker is that those who humbly seek the highest form of spiritual development, to succeed in that endeavor, must, over the years, in the process of their daily living, seek less and less for self and more to serve. For those aspirants, that principle should be incorporated into their daily lives, one day at a time as they are able to do so. A second and very worthwhile lesson of this story is that of the importance of patience. Sadly, when most of us seek patience, we want it right now. Anakin wanted greater progress in his abilities and in the recognition which he wrongly sought. And when the dark side was presented as a shortcut to the things he sought, a supposed shortcut, he was ready to take the bait that led him down the path of darkness. Another and very important lesson that this series teaches us is one that is seen over and over again, and that is the importance of forming alliances when necessary to overcome the forces of the dark side. That is an important lesson for those of us on the planet who know that global conflict is coming. Going back for a moment to episode 3, The Revenge of the Sith. Although it was conceived and written several years ago, prior to events that took place later, it was inspired by higher positive forces to show those of us living at the time of its release what many then noticed and remarked on, that is, the similarity between the storyline of the movie and the world events of that time, 2005 and 2006. From that we will learn one additional important lesson. Where the welfare of the galaxy, or we could easily insert solar system, planet, or nation, and its inhabitants are concerned, one should perhaps consider the thought that it might not always be wise to blindly accept as truth, without further thought or question, every word that comes from the mouths of top leaders. I will at this time, because of its importance, once again state that which was mentioned in an earlier video. Padme Amidala, one of the film's main characters, wisely but sadly observes during a particularly significant session of the Galactic Senate, "So this is how liberty dies, to thunderous applause." I have given you this quote to help you see the relevance of what she said as it relates to events during the time period from the year 2000 to the beginning of 2009. Positive cosmic forces obviously inspired those words to be written for that character in the film to say at that significant time. It's my hope that you'll consider this lesson as a word to the wise. The conditions and circumstances prevalent in the world at the time that this film was released were a precursor for the coming global conflict. These are but a few of the countless reasons why people everywhere have been drawn to see these films again and again over the years. People around the world will continue to be drawn to the final film in this trilogy and to the other Star Wars films, not just because of the quality of the entertainment value of the films, but more importantly because of the inspired messages that are being placed there for all of us. For the sake of these important messages, the higher self of each of hundreds of millions of people has been and will continue to be causing them to feel drawn to see these films. The lessons that the films contain have become and will continue to be a part of the collective consciousness of humankind. For those very important reasons, and because of the high quality of the entertainment and the power which the story that is provided in these films, people all over the world will continue to view them, some doing so again and again for a considerable number of years to come. Given the world events that are yet to come, and the great importance of the inspired messages that these trilogies contain, related to those events yet to come, it is my hope that people around the world will, at least on a higher level, be given a greater understanding of what is ahead and the importance of the messages in the Star Wars films and other films with messages related to those coming times. The Star Wars creator, after the completion of the 2 trilogies, stated that he had completed the series and had told the story that he had always planned to tell. However, in 1977, when the first film was released, he was quoted as saying that he had a story that would be told in 3 trilogies. Given the nature of the rest of the story, we're not at all unhappy that he has now changed his mind of recent time and has decided to sell the rights of the Star Wars stories to the Disney Company so that they will now be able to continue the storyline. It is this speaker's understanding that the original creator of the Star Wars stories has already written the storyline for the next film to be made and released. In fact, it's going to be released, I believe, near the end of this year, 2015. It will be interesting to see if the Disney Company continues to follow the path of high-quality inspired storytelling for which they and the Star Wars creator are so well known, or if they will simply follow the much easier path that will lead merely to higher profits without concern for the story. Time will show us the answer to those questions. Excuse me. The thread that's woven throughout the first released Star Wars trilogy and that entire series of films is the same as or very similar to the theme found in other films. Dune, for example, carries a highly similar theme, but points out openly a very special child, symbolizing the master of the Aquarian Age, God's messenger to the world, whose work will, in reality, begin in the not-too-distant future. Other movies such as Starman, Willow, and The Golden Child do not necessarily have such elaborate storylines, but nevertheless very plainly point out the special child who in each story is symbolic of the real person, the one who will, over a period of time, become recognized by some, perhaps in great numbers, as the master of the Aquarian Age, the Christ, just as Jesus was the Christ and the master of the previous or Piscean or Piscean Age, as some say. These films also call attention to the person who overcomes obstacles and negative forces in order to help make the way safe and to prepare the way and the world for this child whose time in reality is not quite yet. It is my hope that subsequent Star Wars storylines will eventually bring forth the important part to be played by this special child, as was done so in Dune, the child who has already been mentioned as pointed out above in other films. The role of this one who must prepare the way and the world by helping humankind out of the darkness and back into the light, so that they will be more properly prepared to receive the one even greater, the special child, has been portrayed in the films in such a way as to indicate that he is one who will himself provide light. This is symbolized by the planet Jupiter when it becomes a second sun, sun, or second son, spells son, adding to the light already shining on the people of planet Earth. This is as depicted in the film 2010, or 2010, so that the Earth then has 2 suns, S-U-N-S, symbolizing sons, S-O-N-S. Even the beginning of the first film of the first released Star Wars trilogy shows Luke Skywalker looking quietly toward the horizon as the 2 suns, symbolizing S-O-N-S, are seen in the sky. The character Luke Skywalker, as indicated earlier, is symbolic of one of the two sons. He is the one who will prepare the world and the way for the other who is to come later. The character of Paul Atreides serves the same purpose in the film Dune, as does the film character known as the Chosen One in The Golden Child, and the character of Willow in the movie by the same name. At this time, I'm also compelled to mention again, offering a bit more information, another very special film that was released late in 2009. This very enlightening story is one that set new attendance records around the world at the time of its release, and for very good reason. The title of this film is Avatar, and I encourage you to see it if you have not already done so. It is discussed further in another video. There is a sequel being released in the future to that film. It is hoped that the above information has somehow added to your knowledge and understanding excuse me, of how such inspired stories are needed and are therefore given through inspiration by the higher positive cosmic forces in order to enlighten the higher consciousness of those in audiences around the world, in order to help prepare us all for the changes to our world that began in earnest on September 11, 2001, that became more pronounced during the worldwide financial crisis of 2008, and that will be continuing for years yet to come. I thank you for watching, and I now invite you at your convenience to watch the next and subsequent videos in this series. Thank you again.